it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I'm a monster on the run from my past. It's catching up. Dr. John and I had come across an abandoned cabin 10 miles deep into the forest. It was evident to both of us that we'd be staying there for the time being. It was also more than likely that us killing the avian creature had attracted the attention of other cryptids, and they would soon be here to clean up what was left. Dusk was approaching. The shadows of the trees were growing longer. We needed to be efficient. I've stated in the past that I wasn't keen on the idea of bringing others with me, but John was intelligent and much more of an asset than a liability. I slowly approached the steps on the front deck to the cabin, crawling across the ground on all fours. Dr. John was close behind, putting in an effort to be as quiet as possible. The cabin itself was in decent but not pristine shape. There was rotting spots in the wood, the steps to the deck were dented, the front left window had a crack running up the middle, and vegetation was beginning to grow its way up the sides of the foundation. I sniffed the air, seeing if I could pick up the scent of any sort of entity within the structure, but was relieved when I came up with nothing. It seemed safe, for the moment. I smell nothing, Doctor. It should be safe, but still be cautious of your surroundings. John nodded, clearly on board with my assessment. Well, you're the expert. He huffed slightly before following my lead up to the deck. I sliced the remaining integrity off the lock with my claws and pushed the door open, letting us both inside. I stood up in bipedal fashion once in the foyer, the ceiling being about 9 feet high, only giving me a foot of headroom. In case there was anything inside that was making its scent, John and I still did a sweep of the interior, wanting to be thorough about whether or not we were alone. We found nothing but spiderwebs and dust, along with an assortment of old silverware in the kitchen, confirming we were the only beings in the cabin. Pretty soon we're going to have to think about food, John announced, bringing in a stack of kindling for the old, cracked and worn-down stone fireplace in the foyer. Indeed, I replied. In fact, I can journey out now and see if I can kill something and bring it back while you build the fire. Distribution of labor. John looked up as he began to arrange and stack the kindling into the fireplace, seemingly pleased by my proposal. Well, hurry up. It's nearly dark. Not that I'm too worried about you, I just... He trailed off. What is it, Doctor? I inquired, shifting my gaze towards him. I just don't want to be alone when it gets dark, even if we're inside. I don't want to sound like I'm a coward, I raised a fingernail into the air, cutting off his sentence. I understand. You don't have to explain yourself, Doctor. I'll attempt to be back as soon as possible. Stay quiet and keep low, and you don't want to draw the attention of whatever might be lurking in those trees. And with that, I opened the door, got back down on all fours, and crawled out into the forest. My night vision started to kick in as it got darker. I went west of the cabin, continuously sniffing the air to see if I could pick up any foreign scents, mainly of something like a deer. Well, I knew that John and I wouldn't be able to stay here for long. One, because the agency would come for us, and it wouldn't be too long before they found us. And two, the other cryptids would realize our presence and attempt to kill or take John, since he's a human. And three, because I made a promise to a Wendigo back at the facility that I would return within a reasonable time period to come free him, provided he holds up his end of the agreement and only feeds on animals and other monsters, and not human flesh. I wasn't familiar with this forest, so navigating and keeping track of where I was going proved to be difficult. I made sure to make a mental note of where the cabin was, in the event I needed to return quickly. As I pushed through bushes and maneuvered through the trees, I quickly began to pick up on a scent. A strong, horrendously powerful but familiar scent. Blood. I followed the smell, only becoming more potent the closer I got to the source. It was fresh, and I'm sure I wouldn't be the only thing making my way towards it. There was a large clearing in the trees up ahead, I could make out a bulky figure standing or kneeling over something else, presumably its kill. I latched onto one of the trees on the edge of the clearing and climbed upwards to get a better view, as well as keeping the element of surprise. I glanced toward the ground and a new scent had combined itself with the blood. It was charred flesh, as if multiple layers of skin had been burnt to a crisp. I recoiled, seeing as how suddenly and simultaneously explosively it had emerged into my nostrils. On the ground I was met with the sight of what looked to be a bipedal creature knelt down over a pack of 5 dead wolves, all of them torn to shreds, either missing a head, half their body, a leg or ears, 2 of which suffered losing all 4. The creature wasn't very tall, maybe 5.5 feet at most, but it was extremely muscular, dark blue veins running along its arms. Its skin was patchy, some of it being burnt to a crispy black, while others were a more elegant light brown. It possessed short patches of dark green hair on the areas where it lacked burns. On the top of its head sat not 2 but 3 curved horns, white like bones and sharp at the tip like blades. The creature noticed my presence, turning around as it let out a deep snarl. Its face consisted of a triangular-shaped mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth but blood-stained, above which were a row of 5 blue glowing eyes, all fixated on me as I stayed perched up in the tree. In its left hand it clutched the severed head of one of the wolves, blood still oozing its way out below the snout. This entity didn't appear to have any claws or fingernails, just 6 long, meaty and horrifically charred fingers on each hand. "Mine, mine, mine," it repeated in a raspy voice with an echo so powerful it could be heard for potentially miles on end. It dropped the wolf head and bared its teeth at me, performing its idea of challenging me to combat. Even though I hadn't come out here searching for a battle, it had already seen me. I didn't know the full extent of its senses and abilities, but I couldn't risk it following me back to the cabin where John was vulnerable. So I did the only thing that seemed logical at the time. I scurried down from the tree and stood as tall as possible, opening my hands and letting my claws be put on full display as I'd done many times before. The cryptid immediately charged, not wasting any time speaking or continuing its attempts to intimidate me. I was prepared. I started out by sidestepping the creature as he began to frantically swing his fists while on his rampage in my direction. A punch of his connected with the trunk of the tree just behind me, hollowing out a large portion of the wood and sending splinters flying through the air as a result of the heavy impact. I wrapped a hand around one of the creature's horns and proceeded to lift him and swing his body in a circle for a brief second before slamming him into the already damaged trunk. His mass, colliding with the tree, caused it to fall over and hit the ground, creating an obnoxiously loud boom throughout the entire forest. The entity had caught me off guard with a swing from its right fist after recovering from the daze of the attack, launching me back nearly a dozen feet towards the clearing, right into the decimated wolf corpses. The force of the blow was unlike any I'd ever received before, but it was going to take much more than that to make me yield. I got up as the creature charged yet again, raising both its fists and preparing to slam them down on my torso. When it was within range, I simply leaped forward this time, my slim figure allowing me to pass through the gap of its 2 forearms as they were in the air and land behind it. I wasted no time by following it up with a counterattack. I lunged towards its back and sank my claws as deep as I could into its flesh, causing it to squeal and shriek as an almost rainbow-patterned stream of blood leaked out onto my arms. Its screams of pain were in shocking contrast to that of its growls and snarls of aggression and malice. In retaliation, the creature delivered a swift but explosive elbow to my chest, sending me onto the ground and sliding across the dirt. My hideous opponent was beyond furious, but also desperate. Blood was seeping from the wounds I'd inflicted on his back. I lifted myself off the ground and pounced on the weeping creature, extending out an arm near his face and dragging my claws across his eyes, completely blinding him. He thrashed around violently as he reached over in order to grab me, but I kept maneuvering and moving around to keep myself out of his grasp as his howls of pain continued to flood my ears. I kept myself latched onto the creature's back as I continued to slash and tear at his tissue. He was able to throw me off his back, but not before I grabbed one of the horns on top of his head and tore it out of its spot. Well, the screams from before were nothing in comparison to what he bellowed after that. I gripped the horn in my right hand, lunged at him one last time, and came down on him, letting out a snarl of my own as I jammed the horn into the top of his skull and dug it in deep enough to hit his brain. The entity's movement ceased. It let out a lengthy but faint breath as its last few seconds of life faded away, soon collapsing onto the ground and its body going limp. He was dead now, that much was apparent. And since I was hungry, I decided to indulge myself on his corpse, ripping and tearing as much meat off his bones as I could until I was satisfied. Loads of his oddly coloured blood had dripped down on my chin and onto my chest. I wiped it away after finishing my feast and stood up. Soon animals and other cryptids would converge on the site of our chaotic and brutal showdown, presumably to clean up what was left over. I noticed a bit of my own dark blue coloured blood dripping on the ground from a small puncture wound on my waist. My chest also ached from the first hit I'd taken from the creature towards the start of the fight, but I knew it would heal soon enough and I'd be fine. I left the clearing after looking around for a bit, killed a simple squirrel on the way back to the cabin for John to eat. I didn't have time to look for anything bigger or more filling. Not with John still at the cabin by himself with no weapons left for self-defense. "What took you so long?" he exclaimed as I let myself in, being careful not to stand up too fast and hit my head on the ceiling. "I was unfortunate enough to encounter a cryptid," I replied. "I couldn't risk it following me back here and discovering you." John's expression of annoyance quickly shifted into one of gratitude, but also pride. He seemed quite impressed at what I considered a casual announcement. "Oh, well, thank you. Well, that was probably the right call. I mean, after all, you're the boogeyman's boogeyman." Without responding verbally, I held out the corpse of the squirrel I'd snatched up on the way back. John looked at it blankly, unimpressed by what was in front of him. "That's my dinner, I'm guessing?" he asked, already aware of the answer. "Precisely," I responded, raising my opposite hand and pointing a finger toward the fireplace, which was now lit, the smell of smoke lingering in the foyer as the flames danced around the wood. "Well, I found some knives in the kitchen after I finished up making the fire. I'll get one and gut this poor guy," John announced, holding up the deceased squirrel above his head. John went on and did as he proposed, skinning and gutting the dead creature, although he didn't appear to be very skilled at it. Well, there wasn't enough time for him to perfect his craft, as we had to keep moving in the morning. I sat with John by the fire as he allowed his meal to cook, an experience I had never had previously, and it was soothing. The only time I had to ever relax was in my containment cell back at the facility. I was put in there between operations or missions. Granted, they allowed me to roam around inside, but there wasn't much to entertain or stimulate me. I accepted it back then, saw it as a positive, and didn't question the nature of why I was in there. But now I know. The more and more I reflect, the more I realize how cruel they truly were to me, despite them spending decades manipulating me into thinking the contrary. But instead of focusing on my own suffering, I turned my attention to John, who stared uneventfully into the fire as his meat was being cooked. "Doctor, before we'd escaped, when I intervened in your fight with the other scientist, he mentioned your daughter had been taken by a cryptid," I stated. "Is that true?" John's eyes widened, taken aback about what I'd just brought up. But he kept his composure, even though I could see a look of despair emerging onto his face. The kind of despair only a grieving father could hold. "Yes," he replied softly. "It's why I joined the agency, to study and learn more about the supernatural. The things that were here before us and will be hereafter. I thought that maybe if I learned enough, then I could find her, maybe save her, but it's pretty stupid to think she's still alive. Look, don't feel bad, it's just reality." "Us?" I quizzed, confused by his wording. "Yes, us," he repeated. "Listen, Braun, I don't consider you a monster. Not at all. I'm truly sorry for what the agency did to you for so long. All their lies and deceit. I should have done something sooner. It's just being a damn coward. I immediately put a hand on John's back, being careful not to pierce his skin with my claws. You're no coward, Doctor. You defended and stood your ground for me even when it wasn't your place to do so. You've assisted me in conquering a threat that was far beyond your understanding and range of knowledge, even when you could have died. The only coward I've ever met is Dr. West. A smirk crept up on John's face, drastically changing the energy of his moods. He kept turning the meat over in the fire as he replied. Yeah, but thanks to you, she's 6 feet under. He huffed as his eyes stared forward. John retracted the meat from the flames. With it now fully cooked, he brought it towards the center of the floor we sat on, placing it on an old cloth he'd presumably discovered while looking around the cabin. Of all the people I've met, you're the most human out of all of them, John vocalized, taking a glance up towards my eyes. I'm grateful for your kindness, Doctor, but this world, your species, they'll never accept me. No matter how much I may try to prove otherwise, I'll always be a monster in their eyes, and nothing more. But that won't stop me from protecting your kind. That's extremely noble of you, Braun, protecting a group that doesn't deserve it. I know we're definitely not saints, but I guess we are salvageable, he said with a hint of sarcasm near the end. The rest of the night went as expected. John and I discussed our views on the world and the predicament we're currently in. He even taught me certain social customs and things humans do that I didn't know of, like fist bumping, which was odd seeing as he'd just informed me of the gesture of high-fiving not long ago. John finished his dinner, and we soon drifted off to sleep, although he ended up sleeping far longer than I did. I only needed a couple of hours at most due to the way I was designed. John awoke as the sun had finished rising. Birds were outside chirping away as the morning light shone through the windows. He didn't waste any time. He and I exited the cabin and began journeying deeper into the forest, John bringing along the knife he'd used to prepare his meal the previous night as a last resort weapon. You know, when my daughter was taken, I realized I'd never get her back. I considered ending it all. Just a few too many pills and the pain would all be over. I thought there was no point to living if I didn't have her around. John announced it with an almost apathetic tone, as if he'd just informed me that he'd stepped on a twig. But the pain in his eyes was vivid. I could tell he was masking what he truly felt. I was sure he was used to it due to his line of work, always concealing his grief for the sake of the mission, and in the name of progress. I stopped us both, looking down at John as he tried to avoid eye contact. I'm truly sorry. If I were there to save her, I would have done it in a heartbeat, I stated. I know nothing about such experience, but I can guarantee you were a great father. We approached close to the clearing where I'd fought and killed the strange entity last night. All the leftover biomass and body parts were gone. Well, it was easy to assume wildlife and other cryptids had come to clean up overnight, only leaving patches of blood spread out across the grass. Geez, you weren't kidding when you said you messed him up pretty good, John stated, pointing at the site of the aftermath. Well, he, seemed quite upset that I Before I could finish my sentence, a repetitive whooshing and whipping caused me to turn my head toward the sky. John was slightly confused at first, wondering what it was I was reacting to, but in several seconds it came within his range of hearing. Oh shit, helicopter! He exclaimed in a forceful whisper. Get low, now, I shot back. John and I were both lowered ourselves to the ground as fast as possible, crawling behind some bushes in an attempt to keep ourselves more effectively hidden. Damn, they know we're in this forest. We've got to get out of here soon, before they cut off all our exits, John went on. Damn, I told you it would have been wise to destroy the truck. They surely tracked it here. I was foolish to let it be. Now we're in jeopardy. The helicopter hovered over the clearing for several seconds before descending. 8 soldiers with gear I'd recognized emerged from the vehicle, 4 from each side. They curiously circled the clearing after exiting, investigating and looking over the blood as John and I watched from behind the bushes and trees. The helicopter itself was mounted with what looked to be machine guns and small-capacity missile launchers of its own, clearly doubling as a transport and compact vehicle. They were soldiers from the agency. Speaking of which, one grabbed his radio, pushing down the button and speaking into it as he looked over the area. "Come in, Command. This is Agent Ben reporting in with Team X1. We're at the site right now, with evidence of some sort of feeding frenzy that took place. There are currently no concrete signs of Subject 16A or Dr. Jonathan R. Dilliard, but we'll keep looking."
"Actually,"
one of the other agents called out,
"you might want to take a look at this."
He punctuated by pointing towards the ground. When I'd realized what he was talking about, I could physically feel the blood stop itself mid-flow in my veins. The soldier was pointing at a particular patch of blood. My blood. The blood of mine that had seeped out from my minuscule wound after the confrontation with the cryptid. But it was enough to be seen.
"Oh, it might be his,"
the agent followed up, kneeling down to get a better look. "Let's get a sample and get it back to the lab. We'll get the geeks to run their tests and do their thing," the other replied. John crawled over closer to me, looking into my eyes with grand intentions. It appeared, by just his facial expression alone, that he'd hatched a plan.
"Hey, use your claws to test some of my lab coats,"
he asked, yanking at the fabric. His idea had quickly clicked in my mind. I did as requested and quietly ripped some of the material off his coat with two of my fingernails. John scratched his own cheeks and forehead hard enough to just about draw blood, and then scraped his hands against the ground, rubbing mud on his clothes and skin to make it appear as if he'd just escaped an attack. "Climb up on one of those trees and get the vantage point. I'm going to bluff long enough to get them all in close enough where you can take them out without any disaster," he informed me.
"Be careful, Doctor."
I nodded to him, following his request and using stealth and precision to scale the closest tree to me. John sighed, clearly nervous about what he was going to do. He raised himself up and began to march toward the clearing, making sure to walk with a limp for a more convincing effect. The soldiers quickly turned their attention and pointed their assault rifles at John. "Come in, Command. Come in, Command. Dr. Jonathan R. Dilliard has just been spotted. Requesting orders," the biggest of the bunch said after fidgeting with his radio. John held his hands in the air. I could only see the back of him for now, but I could smell the fear coming off of him. He was terrified, yet still doing what needed to be done. "Don't shoot," John pleaded. "Don't you understand? Subject 16A, he forced me. He said he'd kill me just like he did West if I didn't help him escape. He made me drive him up and dump him out here. I only just barely got away." It was unclear whether or not the men had bought his story, so they still kept their rifles trained on him, not letting their guard down. "We have orders to kill 16A once we find him," one of the agents in the back shouted. "Where was he last at before you got away?" "There's a cabin about a half-mile from this clearing. I can take you to it, but we've got to be careful. 16A isn't the only thing in these woods," he punctuated by pointing at all the blood on the ground. The agents all turned and looked at each other, debating whether or not it was a smart move to follow John. I was thoroughly impressed with his ability to keep calm in the face of such overwhelming odds. "Right, we'll go with you, Doctor," said the agent in the front, "but you gotta stay in our sight. Do you try to cut and run or pull a fast one, I'll personally make sure you end up as Swiss cheese. Or better yet, I might even let 16A have his way with you before we get to take him out too." The man then turned and nodded his head to the pilot in the helicopter, signaling for him to stay behind. John motioned at the group and began to lead them out of the clearing towards the cabin. I stayed behind and didn't immediately follow. I wanted to wait for a bit. The agents knew I often liked to move from tree to tree, so if I were too close and they decided to look up, it would surely mean the death of John and potentially me as well. "That's a shame what happened to West," said the leading soldier.
"Really? I kind of thought she was a nutcase,"
replied one of the agents towards the rear of the line. All the others seemed to agree with the latter, a few of them even nodding their heads to further the point. I maintained my silent movements as I followed the men from up in the trees, sizing them all up as we approached closer to the cabin.
"This the place, Doc?"
one of the agents inquired, pointing the barrel of his rifle toward the cabin. "Yes, but please be careful. He might still be inside," John said, feigning concern. The agents all raised their weapons and slowly surrounded the perimeter of the cabin. 2 went right up to the front door, presumably to breach it. They looked at each other for a few moments before one clutched his rifle, leaned back, and kicked the door down, despite the fact that I'd already sliced the lock off. The pair entered inside to search the interior, while the other 6 kept themselves posted around the perimeter, keeping them in close enough range to take them out but also not get overwhelmed. I started with the back of the cabin, swiftly but quietly jumping down from the tree and right behind the guards. Before they could react, I quickly grabbed them each by the skull and slammed their heads together, using just enough force to knock them both unconscious for the time being. And, just to be on the safe side, I also grabbed and squeezed their radio devices, crushing them in my hands and cutting off their communications. I was also careful enough to not leave them sprawled out too close to the windows where they could be seen, not wanting the agents inside to sound the alarm if they caught a glimpse of their unconscious comrades. And I moved fast, scaling my way up the back wall of the cabin and onto the roof.
"Hey, did you hear something?"
one of the guards posted on the right side asked.
"Nick, you try to relax. You always get paranoid when we're doing operations,"
replied the one next to him. While on the roof, I shifted over towards the right side of the structure, silently leaning over and peering down at the agents as they watched the tree line. I repeated the same set of actions I'd done with the first pair, then crawled back up to the roof, maneuvered to the left side, and did it once again, only leaving the pair that was searching the inside of the cabin still left. Still moving around the roof on all fours, I made my way over to the front and signaled to John to lure out the 2 remaining agents.
"Hey, quick, get out here, now," he shouted. "There's something coming."
The 2 agents rushed outside, pointing their rifles all around in a frantic attempt to find out what it was that John was talking about.
"What is it, Doc?"
exclaimed the leader towards John. I dropped down and pounced on the 2 guards, slamming one against the wood and letting him slump to the floor on the deck. The other one was able to fire a shot before I grabbed him. The bullet struck me in the waist, and a small puddle of my blood splashed onto the dusty wood finish below us. Instead of immediately knocking him out, I went for his gun first, yanking it from his grasp and slamming it hard enough on the railing of the deck to snap it in half. He attempted to hit the button on his radio and alert command what was happening, but I was quicker and used my claws to slash off his index finger and thumb before they could make contact. He fell to his knees, clutching the stumps as blood pooled around his hand. I grabbed his neck and began wrapping my fingers around his throat and lifting him into the air as I stood up bipedally.
"Let me go, you ugly son of a bitch,"
he squirmed, making futile efforts to escape my hold. I bared my teeth. The stinging from the gunshot wound had begun to bother me, but it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it would be, and it would heal soon enough. The agents utilized armor-piercing rounds on missions, which is what I assume had hit me. But at least I now had the answer to whether or not I was bulletproof. Dr. John marched over with a smug look on his face as I held the still struggling agent. "I'd just like to go on the record and say that I came up with this plan, but I couldn't have done it without my buddy Braun here," he taunted.
"You're both a couple of worthless traitors," the agent shot back. "Nothing but 2 cowards who can't face their responsibility. Don't even know why we're wasting resources trying to get you back or kill you. But when it does happen, I'll be more than happy to watch both of you executed, you freaks." That word came up again. Freak. God, I hated it. I used to play it off and ignore the instances where someone called me that word, but I was done tolerating it. All those years I'd let it slide, but no more. I turned and slung the agent hard enough to send him crashing through one of the front windows and colliding with the fireplace in the foyer. When he impacted with the stone, dust dispersed itself vertically and horizontally from behind his back before he fell face first onto the floor.
The spot where he'd impacted had left a dent that was dripping with an uneven coating of blood. Even John was shocked. He stepped past all the broken glass from the window and slowly approached the agent's body, rolling up his sleeve and checking for a pulse. "He's dead," John confirmed. "Geez, Braun, you threw him hard enough to kill him. Well, not that I blame you." To be completely truthful, I hadn't meant to actually kill the man. The combination of the irritation from the gunshot wound and his continuous arrogance had flared up my rage, causing me to use more force than I'd originally intended. Even covered in body armor and gear, he still couldn't handle the force of the impact. On the second human being I'd ever killed. But unlike Dr. West, this death didn't feel satisfying or cathartic. Rather, it caused me to feel quite guilty, even despite the anger I'd felt towards him. "Don't feel bad, Braun. He was far from a good man," John said, almost sensing the change in my demeanor. "It's not like you just slaughtered the whole squad like some bloodthirsty monster." I knew we didn't have time for me to stand there and reflect on what had taken place. I ordered John to grab one of the unconscious soldiers' rifles, along with the 2 radios I hadn't yet destroyed, and follow me back to the helicopter. The pilot was still sitting inside the cockpit. The look on his face was one of complete and utter terror as he spotted John and I emerging from the trees and into the clearing. Well, he attempted to try and radio command for help, but with my speed and disregarding my wound, I ran across the clearing on all fours and leapt into the helicopter, grabbing the pilot's arm and stopping him. "You will not say a word to them, but if they so choose to contact you, you will inform them that everything's going according to plan. Otherwise, I'll put an end to you and pick your bones clean," I growled, baring my teeth just inches from the pilot's face. He took my threat seriously, and that itself was a massive understatement, considering I picked up the scent of urine suddenly coming from his crotch area. John boarded the helicopter after finishing his dash across the clearing, panting heavily as he clutched the rifle he'd picked up. "Take us back to Site 12. If you try anything funny, I'll paint the windows with your brain matter," John ordered the pilot, keeping the rifle aimed at his head. The pilot, sweating and slightly shaking in horror, maneuvered the helicopter out of the clearing and ascended the 3 of us into the sky. The helicopter radio crackled to life soon afterwards. "This is Command. Please confirm mission status. I repeat, this is Command. Please confirm mission status." The pilot's eyes frantically darted around. John pressed the barrel harder against his temple. I drew my claws, waving them slightly near the pilot in order to intimidate him. "This is Chopper Y-32. Mission was a failure. Dr. Jonathan R. Dilliard and Subject 16A have yet to be discovered or eliminated. Heading back to base." Although it wasn't what we told him to say, it still worked in our favor nonetheless. The ride itself wasn't very long due to the method of transportation. It went by far faster than when we traveled here in the truck. John kept his rifle up against the pilot's head the entire time. I was uncomfortable during most of the ride due to having to lean over whilst inside the cockpit because of my height. Are you guys going to kill me?" the pilot asked, making sure his radio was muted. "Not if you do what we ask," John replied. "What do you guys even want? Money? Guns?" "We want salvation for both man and CRYPTID," I snarled, "and for the agency to pay for its crimes." Once the facility came into view, John and I ordered the pilot to fly to the south end of the building, but still kept us hovering well above the ground. I couldn't simply go inside and free the Wendigo, not how I did it last time. We got lucky and John was able to walk his way through security and get the cameras disabled while I convinced the Wendigo of our plan. Not to mention it was now daytime, which meant more guards roaming the halls. We needed a distraction, and I knew just what it would be. A missile from the helicopter right at the north end of the building where the weapons vault was located. Not only would it be detrimental to their ability to defend themselves, but it would draw them away from the Wendigo cages, long enough for me to free the one I'd made the deal with. "We see you within range to land, Chopper Y-32. Just wanted to confirm your coordinates," came a female voice from the radio. The interior security cameras wouldn't come into play this time around. Not only would they be unlikely to be monitored in real time during all the commotion, but there's a good chance the explosion would corrupt and destroy their ability to function properly. Right, fire a rocket, John demanded the pilot. Northeastern corner. What? The pilot shrieked. Are you insane? No, I growled, reinforcing John's command. Sweat dripped itself down the pilot's forehead as he reached a shaky finger over to the launch button on the cockpit control panel. I could feel the vibrations of the helicopter as the rocket tore through the air and hit its designated target. The explosion was deafening, sending massive shockwaves through the air as flames engulfed the surrounding area before quickly dissipating. I told the pilot to hover the helicopter over the roof of the building. The sounds of rapid footsteps, yelling, and voices filled my ears. The alarms weren't going off, confirming the explosion had damaged the system. Once I retrieve the Wendigo, I'll return to you, Doctor. Now, get out of here, fly deep into the forest and wait for our arrival, I said in a rushed tone. John tightened his grip on the rifle, hesitant to do as I'd proposed. But what about you? Go, I shouted, before they shoot this helicopter down. I jumped out of the side and onto the roof. John stared at the pilot as he quickly turned the helicopter around and began flying into the forest behind the building, doing it just in time before they were shot down. The cryptid containment cells were on the south end of the building, the complete opposite side of where we caused all the commotion. Agents were flooding outside with what little amount of weapons they had left, trying to find any other threats in the area. My gunshot wound had nearly healed completely, so it didn't give me much trouble as I crawled along the roof to the south end of the facility. I found an exterior air duct vent. I quickly wrapped my claws around the cover and tore it off before crawling inside. While scurrying around, I made a trip to the boiler room I'd encountered while hiding in the walls earlier on. I grabbed the most girthy and solid steel beam I could find and took it with me. After which, I journeyed over to the cryptid containment cells, specifically the Wendigo cages. I dropped down from the ceiling after exiting the air duct, and there he was, standing docile behind the strong glass, just staring off into space. Although he perked up when he saw me. For once, I saw some spark of life in those sunken deer-skull eyes. I wasted no time. I began to hit the reinforced glass as hard as I could with the beam. Swing after swing, impact after impact, and it finally cracked. It actually worked. I pulled the beam back and with all my might swung one last time, finally breaking the glass. The Wendigo was joyful as he slowly stepped out into freedom. Not that it was easy to tell from looks alone. You were honest, he said in what I assumed to be his default voice, without mimicking anyone or anything. It was a low yet not extremely bassy tone, resembling the loud whisper of an average man. Follow me, I advised. Be prepared, we may have to fight. But you must remember our bargain. No killing the humans unless absolutely necessary. Saying it almost made me feel hypocritical, considering earlier events. I led the Wendigo down the hall, and we both got down and did our best to move quickly towards one of the side exits on the facility. I was quite a bit faster, but slowed down enough for us to be within a reasonable distance of each other. You kept your word, he told me as we dashed down the hall. As I said I would, I replied, while keeping my eyes laid upon the sight in front of us. I picked up the scent of a guard around the corner. We'd surely have to take him out before moving on. As to why he hadn't joined his comrades at the explosion site was questionable. When we rounded the corner, the guard was paralyzed in pure terror as he got a look at the Wendigo and me. I pounced across the floor and grabbed him before he could react, slamming his head against the wall on the right and letting him fall unconscious. I laid eyes on one of the doors with emergency exit labeled above it. I didn't stop running, and neither did the Wendigo as he trailed close behind. I threw my weight at the door, causing it to be yanked right off its hinges and slam onto the ground. Right into the forest, I announced, beginning to dash into the tree line as the Wendigo followed. I could only hope this would be the last time I'd ever have to set foot inside that cursed building. After I'd picked up John's scent, it wasn't long before we were reunited. He was still taken aback by the sight of another entity with me. He'd originally disagreed with my plan to free the creature. I motioned for the Wendigo to follow me into the helicopter with John and the pilot. Speaking of which, the pilot seemed to be even more horrified at the prospect of a Wendigo being added to the roster of passengers. It's nice to meet you." John scratched his head, looking up at the deer skull, still hesitant at the presence. The Wendigo gave no response, instead simply keeping quiet as he sat in the back of the helicopter next to me. John had told us he had a location in mind of where to go, although he refused to give out the specific details for whatever reason. But even though this wasn't the last of the agency, they had taken quite a hit at their ability to function. For now, we'd be free of their wrath and tyrannical ways. I turned my attention to the Wendigo. He sat idly looking out the window at everything as we passed by below, seemingly entranced by his freedom, similar to how I felt. "They have a tracker on this helicopter," John exclaimed. "So this time I'll take your advice, Braun, and we'll trash this thing as soon as we get out to the spot." I simply nodded in response, not taking my eyes off my new ally. He seemed to have sensed I was looking. He turned, causing his antlers to slightly scrape the ceiling above him. I then asked the creature one simple question. "Would you like a name?" Episode 5. I'm a monster seeking peace. I'm not sure I'll find it. Several months have passed since John and I had dealt significant damage to the agency, and because of that very fact, life has become far less eventful. Well, I use that term loosely. I still hunt and kill other cryptids, mainly for food or to protect innocents, those who pose a threat to humanity and the well-being of societies. And now John and I have a new ally. The Wendigo I'd freed as part of a deal and promise I made. Her name is now Arya. She turned out to actually be female. From the small traces of memories she still held from her days of being human, that's what she'd told me. I tried to find out more, but she wasn't able to recall anything more of importance. I taught her the ways of using resistance and knowing when certain amounts of force were necessary at certain times, and she'd gotten the hang of it quite well. As for John, he'd become more comfortable being around Arya. Although at first he was opposed to me freeing her, he soon learned there were more benefits than setbacks to doing so. She was a positive asset to have around, also adding a missing dynamic to our friendship. For those of you who may wonder what happened to the helicopter pilot, we let him go, making sure to drop him off far away from the location we were currently using as a home. Therefore, he couldn't go telling the agency where we were located. We haven't seen the agency since the last time we were at Site 12. The helicopter we flew there did possess a tracker, so I picked it up, carried it, and threw it into the sizable river after we let the pilot go. It sank to the bottom immediately, although the strong current did begin to pull it apart into smaller chunks, effectively destroying any chance of it being tracked. And this indefinitely brought us the ability to have a more permanent place to stay at. The location John had taken us to was an abandoned spa towards the more undeveloped side of the city. We sat surrounded by forests and fields, cloaking us from most nearby public roads and transportation routes. John had known about the place since he was a child. He recounted tales of how his mother used to drag him here whenever she made appointments, that is, before they shut down. John even took his daughter here a few times before the tragedy of what happened to her. He said, unlike with his mother, he actually enjoyed coming here with her and seeing the look of joy spread across her face. But now that most of the surrounding area had been overtaken by nature over the span of nearly a decade, nobody gave the structure a second glance, although I'm sure the sight of either me or Arya would be enough to send the average man running. One day in particular, I'd taken Arya out with me to go hunting for a new supply of food, mainly for John, who only had about 4 meals worth of sustenance left. He stayed behind in the spa in order to work on reinforcing any weak points that were left over. this time far more confident being alone due to him having an assault rifle he'd picked up off of an agent I'd knocked out a while back during a confrontation at a cabin. Well, John had also finally gotten rid of his lab coat, switching it for an old, black, long-sleeve sweater and a pair of jeans he discovered while scouting around inside the spa. Since both Arya and I were around, John hasn't had to fire his rifle up to this point, meaning that there were still plenty of bullets left for him to use. The particular forest area around the spa had a much less flat terrain than the previous few I'd been to during these past several months. Some hills were steep, so much so that bringing a human along wouldn't do much good anyway. Arya looked at me as we both scanned through the tree line, looking for any potential prey items. It was a subtle bonding experience for the two of us. "The human," she stated, shifting away around a boulder. "Why does he not fear you?" I smiled, allowing my teeth to be shown as I crawled forwards. "He did at first. They always do. Dr. John is a good man, a friend to both of us. I promise you, you can trust him," I assured her. "After all, he's shown he's an ally so far, has he not?" She tilted her deer skull to the left, seemingly trying to look away. "I've killed so many of them," came her loud whisper. "So many humans. Do you think the rest could ever exist with you and I without conflict?" I stopped for a second, my claws sinking slightly into the dirt beneath us as I contemplated my response. "No," I said bluntly. "There will most likely never be peace between Cryptid and man. Not completely. But neither is completely wrong or right in their assumption of the other. I've seen benevolence and evil in both." Arya stood, seemingly saddened but satisfied with my answer. I could tell she felt the same thing deep down, but there wasn't much that could be done about it. "How did you know you hate them?" she inquired, now looking me directly in the eyes. "The humans." "I don't hate them, but some are corrupted," I replied. "Back before I found my path away from the agency, a cryptid whom I'd been sent to destroy murdered the men who were my comrades at the time as I was forced to watch. After which he told me that I needed to discover who I truly am, what I can do. Why the humans in power try to hide our existence from the rest. He was correct with most of his assessment. The only true reason I ended him was because he was slaughtering innocents." Arya seemed stunned by my monologue, keeping her sunken eyes trained forward as we both took in the landscape around us. "Then why did you rescue me?" she asked. I took a couple of steps closer, letting the slight breeze in the forest pass between us. It was a good question, that much was true. "Because now I see the truth. Monsters are made on the inside, not out. You overcame your bloodlust, despite your instincts, and what humanity claims you are, you have shown that you can be different. That you have the will to overcome what you're supposed to be, and instead act as you desire to be. Just as I overcame what the agency had created me to be, a ruthless killing machine. You have to overcome what humanity has painted you to be, a bloodthirsty monstrosity." Arya slightly backed up, not knowing how to respond. I stepped forward and let a claw rest on her shoulder, which she seemed to be reassured by, looking over my shoulder in what almost appeared to be shame. "I still have very much to learn, Braun," she announced softly, shooting a glance toward the ground. We all do," I replied, "both man and cryptid alike." It was when I looked past Arya that I caught a glimpse of something strange near one of the trees behind her. Something that looked as if it definitely didn't belong. Not out here. "What is it, Braun?" she asked me curiously, sniffing the air as I pointed towards the sights. I did the same, now picking up the scent of what was rotting and decayed flesh. "Be on your guard," I told Arya. "We may not be alone." On all fours, I crawled across the terrain and followed the smell, as well as the sights. Arya stayed close behind, keeping a watch behind us in the event of a sneak attack from someone or something. even though I already had an idea to the answer. As I got closer to the source of the smell, it became obvious what was creating the aroma. A body. That of a dead human woman. She'd been there for what looked to be a couple of days, due to the way her flesh was deteriorated. I moved to the side so Arya could see the body as well. Neither of us being disgusted, but rather intrigued. This could mean a potential cryptid was out here with us. Arya was already one step ahead about keeping her wits about her. The corpse was laid up against a tree, strands of her hair still falling from her rotting scalp. Her clothes were torn and ripped, along with multiple remnants of what looked to be pierces and gash wounds in her arms and chest. Her eyes had been completely separated from her sockets, leaving nothing but two empty and fleshy holes. "There's competition in these woods," Arya snarled, getting into a more combative stance. "No," I told her. "This is more likely a human or something even more intelligent." "What makes you so sure, Braun?" she said, turning her deer skull to glance at me. "I've encountered many beings throughout the years, most of which consume their kills just like us. Well, there have been exceptions, but this seems like pure malice. Nothing more than a warning or a trophy designed to strike fear into the hearts of those who come across it." "We should find whatever has done this and put a stop to it," she snarled, "before it attacks us first." Precisely," I responded. "Perhaps we stumbled upon unwelcome territory, something that saw us at home and no longer wants us here." Arya and I continued to search the forest, going up and down hills, running past ponds and through lines of bushes. And for a while it seemed as if nothing was there. Whatever had done that to the unfortunate lady was now long gone. We were about to give up until we heard a scream, a truly deafening shriek of pure terror and desperation, one that couldn't be faked or feigned. It came from someone in trouble, someone who was in dire need of help. Both of us stopped. I was the first to stand and quickly pinpoint the source of the wailing. "This way." I motioned for Arya to follow me east. Soon enough more voices could be heard, mumbling on and on about something clearly important. If it were two humans out here instead of Arya and I, then this mysterious screaming woman would more than likely not have gotten any help. Her screams wouldn't have been picked up by the ears of just a man. Arya and I came upon a makeshift campsite only about 12 meters in front of us. A circle of tents all set up neatly with a blazing fire in the middle, the flames being well over 5 feet high. Around the fire stood 12 humans, a mixture of both male and female individuals, all dressed in similarly black robes. Above the flames were what appeared to be a metallic slab, big enough to lay multiple humans down on. And from all the charred skin and tissue left over on its surface, it was apparent what the horrific purpose of it was. Immediately, Arya stepped back, holding her claws up in front of her face as she tried to look elsewhere. Fire. It was the fire that bothered her. Fire is one of the main weaknesses a Wendigo has, most of which fear it deeply, especially when it's in a high volume like this. I myself didn't have much to worry about. I was extremely resistant to high and low temperatures, and fires never truly bothered me, even when the flames have come into contact with my skin. "No," Arya hissed. "No fire, please, no fire." I turned around, seeing the discomfort in her expression. "I know what fire does to you, but you have to overcome your fear. We need to find out what they're up to," I said quietly, doing my best to calm her down. More screams interrupted us, and I turned back to the campsite. 2 of the black-robed people were dragging a young woman toward the fire. She seemed to have only just about hit her adult years. They stopped dragging her just feet from the blaze, one of the bigger black-robed people stepping out from the circle and into the middle, raising his hands in the air as the woman begged for mercy. "Please, I'll get out of here and never come back. I promise, mister. Ain't gonna tell nobody what I saw," she pleaded, looking up at the man as tears formed in her eyes. Speaking of the man, his eyes were a color of blue similar to that of my skin, a dark midnight blue. His brown hair was long enough to reach his waist. A thick, unkempt and curly beard had formed around his face, obscuring his cheeks, chin, and most of his neck. He looked down toward the young woman, anger seething in his eyes. Even through the material of his robe, I could tell he possessed quite a lot of muscle mass. His shoulders were broad, his legs were girthy, and his facial structure appeared quite chiseled underneath that poorly groomed beard. The young woman herself possessed short black hair, only reaching to about her shoulders. Her attire consisted of ripped-up jeans, a red and white square-patterned shirt, and black leather boots that were covered in dirt and mud.
This woman here has seen us, knows of us, what it is we look and sound like. To all of you, my brothers and sisters, let her be yet another example of what happens when outsiders come lurking where they do not belong, said the ungroomed leader. The long-haired man waved a finger at the two black-robed people who dragged the young woman. They tightened their grip and began to drag her once more, preparing to throw her onto the metallic slab above the flames. Without thinking, I dropped to all fours and charged into the small crowd, now revealing myself and giving away the element of surprise. To my shock, none of the black-robed people scattered or ran. They simply fell to their knees, holding their hands together as they tried not to look me directly in the eye. All except for one, the long-haired man. You will leave the woman be,
I growled, baring my teeth and waving my claws around. The black-robed people all stood back up and slightly separated, creating an opening in the circle. The long-haired man took a few steps back, seemingly not afraid of me, but also not foolish enough to physically challenge me, which would be suicide.
Take the girl. Get her out of here and back to the chapel. I'll keep the self-righteous freak distracted.
I grabbed the bearded man by the shoulder and lifted him up to eye level. He kicked and resisted, but refused to plea or beg.
The last man who uttered that insult to me perished, and for what you've done to that dead woman, or about to do to that living one, it seems you'll meet the same fate,
I snarled, the glow of my eyes reflecting in his.
Oh, please, you won't have time to kill me when you'll be far too busy with Helena,
he cackled, just before proceeding to whistle loudly in a specific pattern. A pattern meant to get the attention of someone or something. The black-robed people all grabbed the woman and lifted her up. She violently kicked and screamed as they restrained her, begging to be let go as she thrashed around in desperation. I could hear the sounds of rapid snapping and wood crunching coming from my right. But it wasn't just twigs or branches. No, entire trees were being ripped apart by the mass coming, not to mention its scent. It was horrendous, a combination of spoiled meat and black smoke. Still keeping the man held tightly in the air, I turned my head back to Arya, who was still cowering from the fire. I knew she wanted to help, but her fear had seemingly gotten the best of her. But I had a plan in mind.
Go after them and retrieve the woman, I shouted. I'll deal with this.
Arya responded by leaping across the ground and into the trees, following the black-robed people as they attempted to run away with the still screaming victim. They would not have the slightest chance of outrunning her, so I was confident it wouldn't take long. She was much more comfortable performing the task that didn't involve being near the fire. I then tossed the long-haired man to the side. He simply continued laughing as he slammed into one of the trees not far in front of us and fell onto the ground, dirt finding its way into his beard and hair as he groaned from the pain of the impact.
You are scum, I remarked to him, killing innocents all while you preach of being great. You are no man who deserves the privilege of life.
The long-haired man wiped some blood from his chin as he smiled, looking over to the entity that was on its way to me.
And neither do you, monster, he shot back. I only see one monster here, I barked.
Looking to my right, I spotted what could only be described as what appeared to be a mutated wolf-like cryptid charging full speed at me. Its fur was a light yellow color, contrasting with the mostly green and brown palette of the forest. Its not two, but 3 eyes leaked out of void-like darkness of some sort,
as if there were black holes within the creature's head. Its long, pointed ears stood tall and perked up on the back of its head, giving the impression it was ready for a fight. The most noticeable feature of all was just its sheer size. On all fours, the back of the canine reached up to just below my neck, meaning that its quadrupedal height was nearly 8 feet high. A truly massive creature. The monstrous canine, who I now knew was the Helena entity the long-haired man had talked about. It stopped only about 10 feet away from me. She exhaled, baring her jagged and deformed teeth at me as I watched air escape from her nostril. She then shifted her gaze and pointed her snout at the long-haired man, as if waiting for orders on what to do. No different than the position I found myself in not long ago. The man stood and groaned, his back still heavily aching from the force I'd thrown him with. Now that his protection was here, he seemed much more content in his taunting expressions towards me. "Kill the blue one," he commanded, pointing one of his scarred fingers at me. "We can't let him destroy what we are trying to create." The long-haired man then turned and dashed off into the forest, but not in the direction of the other black-robed people. No, he went in the opposite direction. More than likely because he wanted to avoid the wrath of Arya, which I found odd considering his content at being thrown around like a toy. Or he was more than likely returning to the chapel he'd spoken of beforehand. I could hear screams of terror and, more than likely, pain in the direction the black-robed people had run off to with the kidnapped woman, signaling that Arya had caught up with them in mere seconds and was already getting to work taking them down and rescuing their victim. I turned my attention back to Helena, attempting to try the less violent approach at first to calm the tension, something I'd rarely ever done with cryptids in the past. "This is not a battle you want to seek. You can be more than what he tells you that you are. You must believe me," I said, keeping my guard up as I spoke, not wanting to be attacked while not expecting it. Helena only continued to maliciously snarl at me, clearly not invested or interested in what it was I had to say. I still figured getting to her psychologically was worth a try, all things considered, but I still needed to defend myself as well as eat. I quickly realized that attempting to talk her down would only be a waste of my energy, so I had to do what I was more familiar with. I went on the offensive, reaching over and tearing the thickest branch I could spot on the tree near to me, following it up by lunging at Helena. Well, Helena opened her jaws wide as I came within range and leaped forward at me with a lunge of her own. I swung the branch vertically in an uppercut-like motion, colliding my arbitrary weapon with her neck area. The force of the impact caused her to be thrown onto her back, and I seized the opportunity and pounced onto her stomach. As I was wrestling and keeping the huge canine restrained, I heard Arya call out to me. "Braun, I've got the woman. I'm coming to assist you," she bellowed, confirming that she'd made quick work of the black-robed people, although it was unclear at the moment whether or not she'd killed them. "No, get her back home," I shouted back, not even turning around to see her. Helena continued to howl and bark, attempting to shake me off of her. I slashed off one of her front legs with my claws, causing her to writhe in pain as a green, almost mucus-colored blood burst its way out through the stump. At one point, Helena had turned over to the side and onto her belly in an attempt to crush me with her weight. Little did she know it was a pointless strategy, one that would only make matters worse for her. I lifted her up and tossed her behind me, and Helena was sent crashing through multiple trees and sliding across the dirt on the ground, finally stopping when she impacted with a boulder sticking out of the ground, causing chunks of rock to fly in nearly every direction. I dropped down onto all fours and charged at her as she was recovering, leaping onto her with enough force to send us both crashing through the remaining mass of the boulder. We tumbled down a hill behind the huge rock together, Helena still barking and snarling at an obnoxious volume during our chaotic descent. Grass, plants, and bushes were all trampled in our path. We both attempted to dig our way into the dirt for traction as we continued our fall, but we were going at a speed too great to completely latch ourselves on. We eventually hit the bottom. A shallow stream of water splashed beneath us after our initial impact.
Helena was the first to recover from the whole ordeal. She charged, slightly limping due to missing a leg, and proceeded to headbutt me as soon as I was on my feet, then quickly following it up by biting me in my right leg and viciously throwing me to her left. I roared from the sensation of her monstrous and deformed teeth sinking into my flesh as I collided with a hill of dirt. She charged once again, and I reacted quickly and wrapped my claws around her snout when she was within range, preventing her opening her mouth to bite me again. After which I vertically maneuvered my arm while I still kept her snout firmly grasped, forcing her to have to look up. Once she did, I seized the opportunity and slashed my claws in a horizontal fashion across her throat. Blood exploded from her wounds. Her once powerful and dominant howl was now reduced to nothing but a gurgling whimper as she fell to the ground in a defeated manner. Helena laid there on the dirt, breathing heavily as she looked up at me, clearly in far too much agony to get back up and continue the fight. She went on to whimper and gurgle as her green blood leaked itself out from the gashes on her throat. I reached a claw over towards the back of her head, applied some force, and tore it completely off in order to speed up her death, not wanting her to have to suffer any longer. Her movement ceased, blood poured out from below her snout, and her cries of pain had come to an end. I threw Helena's severed head behind me, not wanting to look into those black holes of eyes any longer, after which I sniffed the air for the scent of the black-robed people. All I could pick up was the potent scent of iron. Now that the battle was over, it was clear to me what the source of that iron was, and it wasn't the blood of Helena. These people had already proven themselves to be much worse than even most personnel in the agency, especially the long-haired man, torturing and killing a woman for more than likely some petty religious reasoning. Well, even coming close to doing it again, who knows how many previous victims they'd had. I had no issue if Arya ended up killing them, considering the heinous deeds they were up to when we'd stumbled upon them. I should have put an end to the long-haired man when I had the chance. I had hesitated far too long, and it had cost me. But I was grateful we'd saved a life today, although it was unfortunate we couldn't save the dead woman we discovered. Nonetheless, Arya and I were successful with keeping that woman from one of the worst fates known to humanity. Not that I could have the experience myself, but I've seen humans being burnt alive before, mainly men back at the agency when they were out on a mission and had encountered a cryptid with fire-related abilities. Their wretched and relentless screaming as their skin blisters and chars, their kicking and writhing as their bones boil underneath their flesh that's being slowly cooked. It's a sight only something truly evil could receive joy from, and I for sure did not. I did try one last time to detect the scent of the long-haired man, to no avail. He'd gotten too far out of range. For a man who seemed so content at the prospect of his own demise, he was also a colossal coward at the same time. I figured I should get back to the spa with John, Arya, and the woman. There was no use staying out here and attracting the attention of whatever called this particular area of the forest home, especially when I had a fresh body sitting at my feet. Although maybe this forest wasn't as populated with cryptids as I was imagining, considering it seemed like nothing had come to devour the remains of the woman Arya and I had discovered. All the commotion and chaos had made me forget that I was hungry, so I picked up the headless corpse of Helena and brought it with me, carrying her lifeless body over my left shoulder, and ignoring the stinging sensation in my leg left over from the bite I'd received during our battle. John would have to eat whatever was left over and share it with the woman, as not only was Helena's corpse mainly for Arya and I to feast upon, but it was highly unlikely John or the woman would be appetized by it anyway. Once I'd arrived back at the spa, John had let me in. The fire was going toward the middle of the mostly vacant floor. The woman we'd saved sat next to it, an old ragged blanket wrapped around her as she stared at the flames. Arya was back towards the far corner of the building, not wanting to be near the fire. The woman instinctively leaned back when she saw me enter, still slightly frightened at my presence. You saved me, she said with a whimper, darting her eyes between Arya and I. But
Why? Don't things like you eat folks?
Only the ones that are jerks, John joked, attempting to lighten the mood. I kept my distance from her while John heated her up some of his food. Not wanting to scare her any further, she was already extremely shaken from whatever those people had done to her. But the important thing was, she was still alive and here to tell her tale. It's okay. They won't hurt you. They're good, I promise. See the blue guy over there? John asked rhetorically, punctuating by pointing to me. He saved my ass on multiple occasions. His name's Braun. We go back a decent bit. He's really down to earth for a cryptid that can lift a dang helicopter over his head. The woman raised a shaky hand into the air, keeping her gaze focused on the corpse of Helena I had hanging over my shoulder. Hey there, Braun. I'm Jenny. She greeted me weakly.
Hello,
I said bluntly, before motioning over to Arya.
This is Arya, I followed up. She's a,
Wendigo? Jenny finished. Yeah, my pops used to tell me stories about Wendigos. Always kept my butt up in bed with nightmares. But you only seem vicious when you need to be. Can't believe you saved me from those evil folks. John adjusted the blanket on the woman. They're both some powerful creatures, John announced. I've seen it firsthand. But if you leave them be, you have nothing to fear. They only want to protect you, I promise. Arya seemed even more pleased by what John had said than I did, considering it took him more time to trust and warm up to her. I signaled over to Arya to follow me outside, my plan being for the two of us to feast out there while the woman calmed down and sat with John. I laid the corpse down on the overgrown lawn in the front, all sorts of weeds and plants sprouting up from what used to be a parking lot. Arya and I began to tear into our meal, even at one point getting in a petty tug-of-war over the deceased creature's small intestine. It wasn't long before we'd reduced Helena down to a stack of blood-covered bones. Only the tiniest strings of flesh and tendons remained on her body. I stared off into the forest, the sun now starting to descend as evening approached. Arya turned to look at me. Splatters of green blood covered the snout of her deer skull.
Do you think we can trust her, Braun?
She asked, still finishing off the last bit of meat from a bone she held in her claws.
I'm not sure, but I'm certain we can trust her far more than those depraved humans who are going to be roasting her alive.
Arya dropped the bone, turning and looking away as she did so. I'm sorry I didn't assist you at first, but the fire just... Arya said, sounding defeated.
You did well,
I said, turning my head to look at her.
You saved Jenny. That was a great help in itself. If you can overcome your strongest bloodlust, you can overcome your greatest fear.
I paused then, using my right claw to scrape out a piece of flesh stuck between my teeth.
Did you kill the ones in black?
I inquired.
Some,
Arya responded.
Does that anger you, Braun? I remember what you said, the promise I was made to keep.
No, I replied immediately.
They are corrupted, even beyond the agency. They're far more monster than man. I told you that killing those who incite conflict with you or innocents are exceptions. I was close to killing the leader myself. They are merciless, cruel, and nothing short of evil.
Arya pointed a fingernail towards my injured leg, which had already begun to heal. The pain was still there, however, and I did my best to put it off and focus on the discussion at hand.
Oh, you're bleeding, Braun, she announced. It'll heal soon enough, but I thank you for your concern.
Arya looked forward as if to contemplate and think of what she was going to say next. There was a silence between the two of us, neither of us having much to say or talk about. It wasn't like my time with John. The two of us always usually had something on our minds that we wanted to speak about. But this was much different. Even outside I could hear the mumbles of John and Jenny inside, but purposely ignored it. However, it appears that whatever it was they talked about was important, as John had stepped outside to get Arya and I's attention.
Braun, Arya, he called to both of us. We gotta talk.
The two of us swiftly followed John inside. He seemed to have a bit of haste in his step, clearly wanting to inform Arya and I of whatever it was as quickly as possible. Since he'd finished cooking for both him and Jenny, we put the fire out for the sake of Arya, wanting to have her full attention on the conversation and not concentrating on avoiding the flames. "Jenny," John said, inching his body close to hers, "can I tell them what you said to me?" Jenny perked up and nodded, seemingly in a much better mental state than earlier. She looked around the circle at the three of us, becoming more comfortable in our presence little by little. Mainly warming up to specifically me, as I am the one she spent the least amount of time with at this point. "I live on a farm not far from here," she began. "It was given to me after my pops had died. He was killed by something that was no man, well, far from it."
"Did it look like me?"
Arya interjected. "Nah, I would have known if it was a Wendigo. Well, the thing that killed my pops, it was one ugly son of a gun, but that's not what I'm here to tell y'all." "I'm sorry," John added. "My daughter was taken from me. I know how it feels to lose someone." Jenny looked to John, letting a smile emerge from her face. "I bet she was a wonderful little ball of sunshine," she told him, causing John to mimic her smile as if it were contagious.
"The Black Robe people," I said. "Tell us about them. They're now a threat to all of us, and we need to learn more."
Jenny locked her hands together, letting out a heavy exhale before she spoke. "Well, going to town often, you know. Getting supplies and such. A few days ago I hauled myself over to the library. Just thought it'd be dandy to have a good book around when I was finished with the farm work. Anyway, I saw this older gal towards the back. She looked real shaky and nervous, even frightened if I'm really pushing it. I tried to ask her what was the matter, but she said it would only make things worse if she blabbed."
"Blabbed about what?" John asked, desperate for an answer.
"Well, something about these folks in the black robes. I don't know what they did at the time to scare her so bad. I offered to get the cops involved or find her some help, but she begged for me not to do it. Said it'd only stir the pop more and make her predicament worse. Oh, told me she saw something she wasn't supposed to. They were coming for her. Those folks in the robes."
"Did you try helping her regardless of her not desiring it?"
I questioned. "Well, I very much did, but they came for her not too long after that. I tried to stop them while they carried her poor butt out the back doors of the building and took me too, well, after I jumped in the mix. Blindfolded and gagged the both of us. Said that if we told her so, they'd get our folks too. Make them watch us die before they did the same to them. Well, they dragged us out of there and killed the other girl. They were waiting a few days to cook me while I was still kicking and could feel it. The day came and they were going to do it. Well, that's when your two strange but helpful friends came to my rescue." The four of us all shared glances, darting our eyes around the room just before John raised the question we were all pondering about. "So, they're a cult. Do you know what it is they worship or want?" he quizzed. Jenny shook her head vigorously, indicating what John said was far from correct. "Nah, there's something more evil than that, more complicated. Their goals are bigger than just some demon worship or ritual. I reckon they'll be back faster than you can say the word cult, and in bigger numbers. Well, I don't know much, but I heard a lot of voices while I was blindfolded. They definitely got more than just 13.
"The one with the long hair," I began. "Do you know his name?"
Well, I heard a few of those weirdos say something like Ubal, but I can't be too sure. Never really been too sharp with my memory ever since I got kicked by a cow when I was a little girl." Ubal. The name kept repeating itself in my head. I hadn't even known of his existence for more than several hours, yet his name still provoked a deep rage within me. The same feeling of rage only one other name had ever been able to bring to the surface. The four of us continued to converse throughout that evening. Eventually nighttime came and John and Jenny went to sleep. I was unable to fall asleep and get the couple of hours I usually desired, and so I went outside, crawled up a nearby tree and simply looked out over the surrounding area. Maria came with me. She sat at the bottom. We exchanged a few looks as we both sifted through our own thoughts. I thought about a lot, contemplated the events of my life over the last several months, wondered about where I would be if I'd altered certain decisions. I did not regret most of my choices, especially leaving behind my former life as what amounted to being a CRYPTID mercenary. But one thing is for sure, I know that there would eventually come a day where I'm not able to keep myself hidden from the world anymore. And on that same day, everything I know would be in jeopardy. I thought back to when this all started, the day I encountered the yellow tentacled monster. Through all his monologuing and rambling, there was one sentence that stuck with me the most. You are the material of a king, but continue to play the role of a pawn. I shifted my thinking over to Ubel, pondering as to where it is he could potentially be or what he was doing. I knew that first encounter would not be the last. No, he would come back. The hatred in his eyes, the way he told Helena to kill me without hesitation, as if I were nothing more than a nuisance. I didn't fear him. No, I could tear his head from his neck without so much as grunting. Rather, I feared what it is he might do to John, or even Jenny, in order to get to me. And not to mention Helena. Yes, she was a bloodthirsty canine cryptid, but was in the same position I once was. That's why I attempted to speak to her at first, to inform her that things did not have to stay that way. She didn't have to be Ubel's killing machine, as I was the agency's. But, in this world, not everyone can be saved. I wondered how many other humans or cryptids were out there, being used as nothing more than simple assassins, lied to and manipulated by those who held power over them. Well, as I've said before, both man and cryptid can be monsters. And I hunt monsters. So there we go, episodes 4 and 5 of this series. I did 1, 2, 3 in the first video, so this was 4 and 5, and lots more to come. There are going to be 12 in total, so probably another 3 videos for me, because some of the parts are quite long. It might be standalone episodes, but nevertheless, I'll get there eventually. So, hope you're enjoying this one as much as I am. I think this is great. Really, really loving reading this for all of you. So, that's Saturday night. Bonus one for Saturday. And like I said yesterday, I'll be back again on Sunday. Got some plans for tomorrow, but not quite sure what it's going to be yet. Isn't that always the way? Anyway, enough for one evening. Back again tomorrow with something to delight you, I hope. Till then, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.